Hi, everybody. So today I'll be talking about effective user research methods in UX. First of all, hi, my name is Laura, and I've been working at Wix for 6 years. Okay, during my time at Wix, I've had several different writing jobs. So I started out as a content writer for ADI. Yep. Okay. Then I worked as a template writer, writing content for web templates. And most recently as a UX writer in a company called Wix Data. And that's what I currently do. So before starting, I just want to give you a bit of background on Wix Data since I'll be mentioning it throughout my presentation. At Wix, websites can have two types of content. They can have static content or dynamic content. Static content is content that sits on a website. And it's great for text that doesn't need to be updated that often, such as a welcome section or an about section. Dynamic content is actually managed separately from where it appears. Dynamic content is great for parts of a website that need to be changed and added regularly. Like for example, a recipe site where new recipes are being added all the time, or a real estate site where listings often need to be updated, removed, and added. Wix Data supports dynamic content. It allows you and your collaborators to manage content separately from design. So every time you want to add new content to your site, all you have to do is add a new item or row to the collection, which is that database table you see on the left. With dynamic content, you can change content in one place, and that change applies anywhere it appears on the site, like with these pink shoes. This is exactly what happens if you have, for example, an e-com site. But with dynamic pages, you can design everything just the way you like it. With dynamic content, you can also change a layout once and apply it to multiple places. So for instance, let's say I want to change the font for every page where a single shoe appears. If I was using regular pages, I would have to go one by one, changing the font in every single one of those pages. But with dynamic pages, it applies everywhere at once. It's dynamic. Both the content and the layout become dynamic, which makes for a much more efficient product. That's the basic concept of what we can do with Wix Data. As a UX writer, great. So now we can go back to talking about user research. As a UX writer for Wix Data, user research has always been a central part of my job. At Wix, business analysts, support agents, UX designers, writers, product managers, we're all collaborating all the time on user research. Whether it's research before, during, or after a new feature is being developed, it's a central part of what we do here at Wix. User research has also actually helped me create strong bonds with my team. Because when I first started working at Wix Data, I felt like we really didn't know our top users as much as we should. So I made it my mission to get to know these users. I started organizing regular talks with some of our top users, and all I wanted to do was talk about the product. I invited everyone on the product team to join, and everyone started being very engaged, and pretty soon we were having these talks regularly. I uploaded all the recordings to a website called Dovetail and organized insights into action items. Action items that eventually they influenced our roadmap plans. I was put in charge of the user voice segment for the roadmap. And since then, I'm the first person anyone in my team turns to when it comes to user voice. So now I want to talk about why we even do user research in the first place. Why is it important? So first of all, we do research to understand who is using our product. What kinds of users need us the most? What level of experience do they have using the content manager? How do we approach brand new users who have no idea what Wix Data is? This is one that we're still trying to figure out, by the way, since the learning curve for our product is a bit steep, but it's really getting better all the time. At Wix Data, our top users are usually professional website builders who are building sites for other users. And we make strategic decisions based on whatever we find out during our research. We also want to know exactly how users are going about using our product. What kinds of sites are users building using our features? How are they using our product in unexpected ways that we might not know about? Where are their gaps? Are they finding everything that they want? Are our features discoverable enough? Are we enough to understand? Where is our terminology confusing? What is working and what can be improved? These are questions that we're constantly asking ourselves. Finally, we also do research because we want to speak the language of our users. We want to be speaking the same way that our users are speaking about us. So we're always looking into that. How are existing users talking about the product? And does what they say align with our UX writing? Where is terminology confusing? And are we always being consistent with how we're mentioning our product? Only after we've answered all of these questions effectively and to the best of our knowledge are we able to then identify problems, prioritize issues, and then we can use all of this knowledge to make product decisions, UX decisions, and content decisions. Okay, so the next question is, when do we do user research? And the answer is we are actually doing research all the time throughout the entire cycle of a product or feature. From the moment we come up with an idea, we need to use research to even start validating and justifying bringing this idea to life. So that's where we begin. We'll usually start by justifying why we're working on something in the first place. So if in any product that you work on, there's always going to be more things that you could do than time. So all of these ideas usually live in some kind of a product backlog. So anytime a new project begins, we have to use research to answer the question, why is this the most important thing to work on right now? Like if our time is limited, so we always have to be justifying why we are working on this specific issue. Once we've validated a product, wireframing can begin. During wireframe creation, UX designers and writers work together to come up with an initial design. And as we come up with that design and that content, we're using research to validate the concept we've created. Usually this comes in the form of usability testing. We'll show the feature to all kinds of people, all kinds of users, and that's how we realize what's working and where we need to improve the product or the feature. We spend several weeks talking to users, doing usability, brainstorming, tweaking the design and the content, and tweaking it again until we're satisfied enough to launch. And once we release the product, we're still doing research, usually in the form of an A/B test, where we measure how a new feature affects the product and also Wix as a whole, and how an improved feature is better, or for example, how an improved feature is better than one that we had before. Now I'm going to talk about some research methods, user research methods. So as UX writers, we need to be familiar with all kinds of user research methods in order to know which ones to use and how to best combine them together. So to understand user research better, I want to show you how we can split them into two different buckets that will help you kind of like organize them in your head. So the first bucket is what we call behavioral research. This is related to everything a user does, such as what percent of people purchase the product or how many people click the button. On the other side, we have attitudinal research, and this is related to what a user thinks. So let's say a user says that a product is hard to use, or they say that they prefer a shirt in a certain color. This is attitudinal because we're not measuring any actions. All we're doing is measuring the thoughts that a user has, or what they think they would do in a certain situation. The clicker broke again. Yeah, okay. Okay, sorry guys. Okay, so now I want us to play a game. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show you a research method, and I want you to tell me whether you think it's behavioral or attitudinal. So remember, behavioral is all about how a user behaves, and attitudinal is all about what a user says. So let's start with an easy one. User interviews. So raise your hand if you think it's behavioral. Cool. So now raise your hand if you think it's attitudinal. Yeah, I told you it was easy. Okay, so you're right. User research is attitudinal completely. It's all about users talking about their feelings. And sometimes users think something, but they'll act completely different to what they think. This is something to keep in mind. What about A/B tests? Let's try again with A/B tests. Who thinks A/B tests are behavioral? Raise your hand. Nice, another easy one. And raise your hand if you think A/B tests are attitudinal. That's right, they're behavioral. A/B tests measure a user's behavior in real life and in their most natural environment. So these first two are really, really purely on each method. What about surveys? Who thinks surveys are behavioral? Okay, who thinks they're attitudinal? Nice. You're right, surveys are attitudinal, and it may seem counterintuitive, but oftentimes the same person will answer the same questions differently depending on where the questions appear in the survey. It's not even intentional, but it really happens all the time. Okay, let's try one more time. Do you think support tickets are behavioral or attitudinal? So raise your hand if you think they're behavioral. Okay, now raise your hand if you think they're attitudinal. This was a trick question, actually. Support tickets are both. So let's say a user contacts support because they got stuck during a flow. So they were doing something, they got stuck, that's definitely behavioral. But then they're going to talk to a support agent and they're gonna tell the support agent what they think and how they feel. And this gives you attitudinal research insights. At Wix, we mostly focus on behavioral research. We do both, but we really tend to focus on definitely having behavioral research. And to understand why, I want us to go back in time to revisit a very famous case study, the case of the Sony Boombox. So back when Sony was designing the Boombox, they held a focus group and they asked participants whether they thought the new product, the new Boombox, should be black or yellow. The participants sat down, had a lengthy discussion about it, and finally, they unanimously decided that the Boombox should definitely be yellow. Every single one of them said yellow. After the session, they were told that they could take a free boombox on their way out. There was a pile of black boomboxes and a pile of yellow boomboxes. Can you guess which color they picked? Every person took a black boombox. So actually, Matt Watkinson, who studied this case, says that what people say isn't always a true reflection of what they think or how they'll behave. Attitudinal research is useful, but it should always be taken with a grain of salt because as humans, we're simply unaware of how unaware we are. Now, I'd like to talk about another case that we had, this time with Wix Data, the product where I work. So I am going to walk you through a project in order to illustrate how we use user research to make pretty much every major decision along the way. And the project I will talk about today consisted in improving an existing feature that we have in Wix Data. This feature allows users to convert a static page, which I mentioned earlier, into a dynamic page. Remember, I spoke about it earlier. A static page doesn't need to be updated that much, but dynamic pages are super easy to update all the time. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background so I want to make sure that you understand the concept. So let's say you just designed this great recipe page. You took the time to choose all the perfect fonts, just the right layout. The image is centered and all the sections are set up exactly how you want them. And now you want to add all the rest of your recipes to the same site. Of course, you want your site to look uniform. So you want each recipe page to have the same layout and the same design. Now, technically, you could just duplicate each page on the site. Not only is this tedious and repetitive, but we also have a static page limitation at Wix. And the reason being is that having too many static pages is an issue for performance. What Wix is doing every time your browser loads a site, it's loading every single page that it finds on that site. So just imagine how hard the browser has to work to load hundreds of site pages every time you open a site. With dynamic pages, your browser only loads the pages that a visitor wants to navigate to, which is better for performance. So this is this is how giant sites like Google or Facebook have good performance because they're only loading whatever the user needs to see at the moment. When users have repeating layouts, such as with a real estate site with lots of listings, or the recipe example I just spoke about, it's just better to use dynamic pages. So we offer users the option to turn a static page into dynamic. But the reason we had to revisit this feature, which we already had we already offered it at Wix, was because we had an unusually high volume of support tickets in two main areas. And that's because once we looked into it, we found out that something simply wasn't working right. So the highest number of support tickets were actually related to dynamic pages and to the 100-page limitation panel that I spoke about a bit earlier. After seeing this volume of support tickets, we decided to investigate further. First, we decided to put ourselves in our users' shoes. We wanted to try it for ourselves and understand what they were going through. And basically, we wanted to use our own instincts to draw some conclusions. So we used the feature exactly as it was when we found it. After clicking on Convert to Dynamic Page for a static page on a website, this is where we arrived. Right away, we knew that the design was messy and the content was hard to understand. We were mentioning terms that were foreign for any new user, such as dynamic pages, content manager, and collections. And to make matters worse, the only linked help article was unrelated and out of date. After a user continued, they were brought to this collection. They were taken to this collection. And here in the content manager, we also realized that we weren't really helping new users connect the dots of our product. Not only did we fail to explain what a collection was, we also didn't explain what all these rows of random content were or how they were even connected to the page they were trying to make dynamic in the first place. And if the user actually stayed long enough to exit and navigate back to the editor, they really didn't know what had happened or what had changed. We were starting to understand why there were so many tickets related to this flow. We had some ideas and started to draw out some hypotheses, but our research had only just begun. Next, it was time to check some user sites. And during this part of the research, we found that dynamic pages and collections were being used in very strange ways. On this site, for example, a user had created one collection for every single state of the United States. For some reason, they hadn't figured out that they needed a single collection with one row for each state. We also found lots of sites of users who were simply setting up dynamic pages, but then using them as if they were static pages. We understood that users were just simply not grasping the power of dynamic pages. They were using it as a workaround to this limitation that I mentioned earlier. The next step was to talk to these users directly to understand exactly what was going on here. And that's how we confirmed that users were confused. They weren't really grasping the concept of dynamic pages as we thought. They were using it as a workaround so they could continue working on their sites uninterrupted. Users said they used dynamic pages because Wix made me do it. They thought using the content manager was a waste of time, but we knew that using the content manager right could actually save tons of time. We took all of our findings and used them in order to work on a brand new flow, one that would address all of the issues we had encountered. While we were working on wireframes and content, we also had several rounds of usability testing along the way. In total, we did 4 usability rounds and spoke to 23 users. And with each round, our flow and our screens got better and better. Usability really helped us resolve some interesting content challenges. Like here, for example, where user comments and reactions from usability sessions gradually led us to a version we were satisfied with, the one you see on the right. No, on the right. With the final version, we did our best to answer everything in the product, and when we couldn't answer, we provided on-screen help articles for. Finally, we felt confident enough to finalize our product, and this is how the flow looks like today. First, we cleaned up the whole experience and used every single opportunity to tell users what was going on at that specific moment. With the new side panel experience, the user could see what was happening on their page rather than having it hidden behind a panel. We also divided all the actions into smaller steps, essentially creating a wizard experience. First, users were given the choice between creating a new collection to store all of their content or choosing an existing collection that they already had in their content manager. Having a wizard that was divided into many small steps also allowed us to provide dedicated help articles that were specific to each step. Like here, for example, where we have a small yet very helpful article that talks about saving your content to a collection, which is exactly what is happening on the screen. Or here, where we explain the concept of giving your collection a name. Of course, we tried to keep product text as explicit and clear as possible, but we also provided dedicated help articles along the way, just in case. Now this was the most challenging part of the wizard to get right. This is the part where users needed to decide which elements on their page would be dynamic and therefore managed from a collection, and which content on that page would remain static. This is also a place where they could rename their fields before even connecting elements to the collection they're creating. But they could also do that later. So as I said before, to solve this challenge, we relied on several rounds of usability sessions. And eventually we settled for the title, Set Up Your Collection. We told users that unselected elements would show the same content on every page. And we also provided help articles just in case they needed more details about this concept. Finally, we decided that the final content for the button should be connect elements, which is exactly what happened once the button was clicked. The selected elements are connected to the fields that appear next in the collection. At this point, the user actually sees their collection for the first time. And the really cool thing that we got to do with this new flow was that we injected the static pages content into a new collection. So instead of seeing a collection full of dummy text, users could actually see their own content in the collection. And it really helped users understand what was happening. But just in case the concept wasn't 100% clear, we also designed this banner that only appeared the first time that users created a collection. So we had our final version and our final content, and we were finally ready to launch with an A/B test. And unsurprisingly, the new version won. First of all, we saw a 54% decrease in related support tickets over time, and a 49.3% increase for our main KPI among users who use this flow. It was a clean win by a long shot. This just goes to show how being in touch with our users can really influence how a product or feature goes into market. At Wix, everything we do is for our users. And when you're a UX writer, this is especially true. We always want to make sure we get to know users and their pain points. And this is a great example of how we use user research to come up with a much better experience than the one we started out with. Thank you so much for listening. Anyone have any questions?
Hi.
Hey.
Can you go to the page with the that showed like the different text you have that you select, like what can and can't be dynamic? Yeah. So when you click on one of these, does it highlight?
Wait, this one.
Yeah. Does it highlight the section of the text? Okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering like if you ever thought to play around with like naming them what's written, like caprese salad or ingredients.
We can, because it actually recognizes the type of element that it is.
So
So how would you name, like, for example, how would you name an image or something in a different language? Or, yeah, we had to give it something
Yeah.
that was like that would work for every single case, basically.
just curious.
Thank you.
Thank you. No,
Sure.
it's like the fact that it highlights it, it makes sense now. Thank you.
I
Yeah.
actually had more of a question around Dovetail.
Cool.
Could you go into more detail about what Dovetail is and how you used it for your user research?
Sure. So dovetailapp.com is basically a dedicated website that you can use to store research insights. And it has like a really nice interface where you can like upload videos. And like the really positive thing about Dovetail app is that you, like, as a team, we always have access to all usabilities and all user interviews that anyone in our team has ever done. There's also a functionality where you can it creates automatic transcripts, and you can highlight anything that's interesting. And like basically there's all sorts of ways of like organizing data using Dovetail app that like really helps you organize things into buckets and into action items.
And another question about
Sure.
Dovetail is like, does your entire team use that tool, or are you guys still adopting it? Is it like, does everyone use it, or only a few people within your team use it?
On Wix Data, we all use it.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. I was wondering, so I'm sure there's a lot going on, and as a writer, you have so much to do. So I'm wondering, how do you prioritize what projects will you do research on? What type of research? Like, is there anything specific, any specific types of research that you do, or sometimes that you don't always do user research?
I think it really, and you get better at this with time, where like you understand how to combine the best research for a specific project. So for example, for this project, we barely did any competitor research. Like this wasn't relevant for us in this specific situation. Like we focused on what we had. A lot of times you kind of like have to go with what you have. Something else that we were missing in this project specifically was we didn't have like data points for like clicks on the old panel. And that's why we had to rely so heavily on support tickets, because like sometimes you don't have all the data. So basically you first figure out all the data you have, and according to that, you decide what kind of research you want to do. But I think A/B testing is an always, and usability isn't an always, but A/B testing, like we always do. That's one that always happens. And also validating a product that needs to be, whether it needs to be designed or not, like that's something that you need to do.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, me again. Quick question. At the beginning, you said Wix data is really complex. So I'm just really curious how, when you're doing the usability or the user research, like how do you know if it's because the flow is complex that there's a problem, or the content, or like how do you make those decisions? Thanks.
That's a really good question. It's something that we're still kind of like trying to figure out, but like usually we'll compare, you know, like we'll compare what we see before and like what we see after we fix something specific. But you're right, it is extremely complex, and it's a question that we're still trying to figure out. It's something that we're still trying to figure out as a product, because we recognize the power of Wix Data, but we're still not 100% sure how to kind of like get those brand new users using our products. So it's actually something that everyone is constantly always working on and looking into to see how we can improve that. Anyone else?
We have a Zoom question.
Oh,
Hold
nice.
on. They have a question about the data, the result of the A/B test. Was the percent decrease in tickets and increase in engagement? How long did it take to collect this data? Probably a month, because usually
Okay, so with the support tickets, what you do is you take a specific period of time before the feature changes, and then that same period of time after the feature changes. So that's an easy one. And the 49.3% increase, it's as long as the A/B test runs. So this A/B test ran for about 2 weeks. And that's how long it took us to see the increase in users actively engaged. So that one's pretty quick. And the one with support takes a bit longer time, because it's usually like 2 or 3 months. 2 or 3 months that you measured before, and then you have to compare the 2 or 3 months after.
we have one last question, and then we're going to move on to the next presentation. Sorry, we're going to have a break. That's what you all wanted me to say. Really quickly, any research around accessibility that you do. So at Wix, we have a dedicated team. I'm going to answer this question and also ask it. At Wix, we have a dedicated team for accessibility. Our products go through accessibility review, and they are basically like the centralized body that handles understanding what our product should be doing in terms of accessibility, how we should be handling accessibility, like where the product stands before we release it in terms of accessibility. So it's on the product side to make sure that they are meeting those standards. But when it comes to the research for accessibility, usually that's done by the accessibility team. And now break. So how long do we have? 10 minutes. So feel free to grab some more food, go to the bathroom, those on Zoom, do whatever you want. You can close your cameras.